Papa, I was scared. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Nneka overheard that and let out a bitter laugh. Scared? You should be scared of what's coming, you foolish girl. From now on, don't expect an easy day or a morsel of kindness from me. You have no one to blame but yourself. With that, she turned and stomped into the hut, Amaka trailing behind. Amaka paused at the door to stick her tongue out at Omasiri and hiss, "Idiot." In the ancient Igbo kingdom of Udi, where people lived in mud hut houses with thatched roofs and life was guided by the laws of the ancestors, there lived a young girl named Omasiri. She was kind and quiet, with a gentle heart. But Omasiri's life had not been easy. When Omasiri was very little, her mother, Ifunanaya, became very sick and passed away. Ifunanaya had been a loving mother who cared for Omasiri deeply and taught her to be good and strong. After Ifunanaya's death, Omasiri's father, Okori, was heartbroken but tried his best to raise Omasiri alone. In those days, however, it was common for a widower to marry again so that there would be a woman to help care for the children and manage the household. In time, Okore decided to marry another woman named Nneka, hoping to bring some stability and care for Omasiri. From the day Nneka entered Okore's home, things changed completely for Omasiri, and not for the better. Nneka was nothing like Ifunanaya. Where Ifunanaya had been gentle, nurturing, and full of love, Nneka was harsh, cold, and quick to anger, especially with Omasiri. To outsiders, Nneka pretended to be a good and dutiful wife, but behind closed doors, she treated Omasiri very badly. Nneka had a daughter of her own named Amaka, who was about the same age as Omasiri. Amaka was Omasiri's stepsister. Instead of becoming friends or behaving like sisters, Amaka learnt her mother's cruel attitude. Both Nneka and Amaka seemed to take delight in making Omasiri miserable. Every day, Nneka gave Omasiri the hardest chores in the house and on the farm, while sparing her own daughter from work. Early each morning, before the sun even rose, Nneka's sharp voice would cut through the dawn. "Omasiri, are you still sleeping? Get up at once and start the fire, you lazy girl." Omasiri would jump up from her thin mat, still rubbing sleep from her eyes, and rush to do as she was told. She dared not protest or delay because Nneka's scolding could easily turn into blows or slaps if she felt Omasiri was being lazy. Omasiri's chores were endless and exhausting. First, she would sweep the compound's earthen floor using a broom made of dry palm fronds to brush away dust and fallen leaves. While Omasiri swept, Nneka often stood by with arms crossed, eyes narrowed, ready to find fault. If a single leaf or speck of dirt was missed, Nneka would snap, "Can't you do anything right, girl? Look there, you missed a spot. Sweep it again." Omasiri, swallowing her frustration and fatigue, would quietly sweep the missed spot again. Nearby, Amaka might sit on a stool by the hut door, yawning and stretching as she woke up slowly. Nneka never backed others at Amaka to help with morning chores. In fact, Nneka often gave Amaka a sweet banana or bean cake to nibble for breakfast and allowed her to lounge while Omasiri worked on an empty stomach. By the time Omasiri returned to the compound with the full water pot, the sun would be peeking over the horizon. Nneka was usually waiting, ready with more demands. "What took you so long at the stream? We could have fried a whole fish by now," she would scold, exaggerating to make Omasiri feel slow. Without missing a beat, Nneka would add, "Now, hurry and grind some corn. We need to prepare the morning meal, and be quick about it." Quietly, without complaint, Omasiri would set down the water pot. Her arms and neck ached from carrying the weight, but she dared not rest. She fetched the grinding stone, a flat stone and a smaller handheld stone, and poured some dried corn kernels onto it. Then, she began crushing the corn, grinding it into powder for cornmeal. It was hard, tiring work. The grinding stone was heavy, and Omasiri's arms were still those of a young girl, but she pressed on. As she ground the corn, sweat formed on her brow even in the gentle coolness. While Omasiri was grinding, Amaka would often wander over just to taunt her. On such a morning, Amaka sat eating a fresh mango which Nneka had given her and watched Omasiri labor. "You missed a kernel," Amaka said with a sly smirk, pointing at a single corn kernel that had bounced away. Omasiri paused to pick it up and continued, saying nothing. Not getting a reaction, Amaka tried again. "Maybe if your real mother were alive, you wouldn't be so clumsy. My mother says you are hopeless. That's why you have to do all the work." Those words pricked Omasiri's heart. She missed her mother Ifunaya terribly, especially in moments like this. But she knew Amaka only wanted to upset her. So Omasiri kept her eyes on the grinding stone and did not respond, though a tear silently rolled down her cheek and mixed with the sweat on her face. By the time the corn was ground and ready, the sun was up and morning was fully underway. Omasiri started the fire in the outdoor kitchen area, a simple 3-stone hearth on the ground. She blew on the kindling until the small flames grew, then set a clay pot of water to boil. Mixing the cornmeal with water, she stirred it over the fire to cook a simple corn porridge. The smoke made her eyes water and sting, but she blinked away the tears. Soon, the thin porridge was ready. As expected, Nneka and Amaka insisted on being served first, and with the largest shares. Omasiri, using a wooden ladle, poured generous portions into 2 bowls and brought them to her stepmother and stepsister. Nneka tasted the porridge and immediately found reason to complain. "Is this porridge or bath water?" she said, clicking her tongue. "It's too thin. You didn't grind enough corn, did you?" "It's fine, Mama," Amaka said after slopping a spoonful, but her tone was mocking. Maybe she wanted it watery so she could keep more cornmeal for herself later. Of course, Omasiri had done no such thing. She had cooked exactly as instructed, but Amaka's comment added fuel to Nneka's scolding. I'm sorry, it will be thicker tomorrow," Omasiri murmured, bowing her head. In truth, she had made it a normal consistency, but she knew arguing would be pointless. Nneka gave a derisive snort. Useless apologies. Better to do it right in the first place. She and Amaka then ate their portions, with Amaka occasionally making exaggerated faces as if the taste were awful, just to belittle Omasiri further. Finally, Omasiri was allowed to have what remained in the pot, which was a very small portion. She sat on a mat in a corner and ate her meager breakfast quietly. The warm porridge in her belly was a relief, even if it wasn't much. As she ate, she found a small comfort in remembering one of her mother's kind sayings. No matter how small the meal, give thanks, for it will sustain you. So, Omasiri silently gave thanks for the food and prayed for strength for the day ahead. After breakfast, there was no rest. Nneka had a long list of tasks for Omasiri. Go to the vegetable garden and weed it. Then take the hoe and follow me to the yam field. There is weeding and mounding to be done there as well. And don't forget, you must also fetch firewood this afternoon. I want a big bundle, not the tiny load you brought last time. Omasiri nodded obediently to each instruction, though inside she felt a pang of exhaustion already. The vegetable garden was a small plot behind the huts where they grew peppers, greens, and okra. Omasiri spent an hour or more crouched there, pulling out weeds by hand so as not to disturb the vegetable plants. It was tedious work. Dirt got under her fingernails and the sun grew hotter on her back as mid-morning approached. Next, she followed Nneka out to the yam field. This was harder labor. The yam field was a patch of land with several mounds of earth in which yam tubers grew. Weeds sprouted between the mounds and needed clearing, and new mounds had to be heaped up for the next planting. Omasiri's small hands gripped the hoe as she dug into the earth, heaping soil onto yam mounds and chopping away invasive weeds. Nneka mostly supervised, doing a bit of work here and there, but largely pointing out spots Omasiri missed or redoing mounds Omasiri made just to show they weren't up to her standard. By noontime, the sun was high and blazing. Omasiri was drenched in sweat, her back and arms aching terribly. Nneka finally decided to call it a break and said, "I'm going back to the house. Finish up that last row, then go fetch water from the stream again. We'll need more for the evening. After that, you can gather the firewood. And don't dally, the day is not over." With that, Nneka left Omasiri alone in the field. Omasiri's stomach rumbled with hunger. The thin porridge for morning had long disappeared. But she didn't have any food with her, and she still had tasks to do before any hope of a meal. She mustered the last bits of her strength to finish weeding the last row of yams. Then she went to the stream again with the water pot, filled it and returned, each step back feeling heavier than the last as fatigue really set in. For the final chore of the day, Omasiri headed toward the nearby woods to gather firewood. She looked for dry sticks and branches that had fallen to the ground. Finding enough wood, she tied the bundle with a rope made of twisted leaves. By now, the sun was lowering and the light was a golden hue. Omasiri hoisted the bundle onto her head. It was quite heavy, heavier than she'd usually carry, but she knew if she brought a small bundle, Nneka would scold her for being lazy or might even deny her dinner. So she bore the weight and walked slowly back to the compound. As she entered the yard, Nneka and Amaka were resting in the shade, shelling some groundnuts and chatting. They looked up as Omasiri trudged in. Before Nneka could even comment, Amaka piped up with a cruel little smile. "Mother, look, the cow has come home from the field." The implication was that Omasiri, bent under the load of wood and covered in dust, looked like an overworked farm animal. Nneka chuckled at the joke. "Omasiri, set that down there," she ordered, pointing to a spot by the kitchen hut for the firewood stack. Omasiri carefully lowered the bundle from her head. She felt a bit dizzy from hunger and all the effort, swaying slightly on her feet after the weight was gone. "What took you so long?" Nneka asked sharply. "Were you crawling? It's almost evening." "I'm sorry, Mama. The field work and fetching water took time, and the wood was far to collect," Omasiri answered softly, keeping her eyes to the ground. Nneka just shook her head in irritation. "Excuses. Go tend the fire for cooking. I'll prepare the soup. I don't trust you with the proper seasoning. You'll probably ruin it with too much salt." Without a word, Omasiri went to light the evening cooking fire. She blew on the embers from earlier and added some dry kindling until the flames came alive. She added some of the firewood sticks she'd collected. Soon, a warm fire was crackling. Nneka put a pot on the fire with water and the ingredients for his simple soup: some greens, a few pieces of dried fish, pepper and palm oil. As the pot heated, delightful smells wafted up, making Omasiri's stomach twist in anticipation. But even then, Nneka did not let Omasiri rest. "While this is cooking, go and split those firewood logs into smaller pieces for tomorrow," she said, gesturing to a few thicker branches in the woodpile. Though her whole body begged for rest, Omasiri obeyed. She picked up the heavy chopping knife and began splitting the logs on a flat stone. Each third of the knife echoed her own exhaustion. At last, as the sun was setting and painting the sky orange and pink, dinner was ready. They all sat on mats outdoors to eat. That was customary in the cool evening air. Nneka dished out portions. Again, she gave herself and Amaka generous servings of the soup with pieces of fish and pounded yam fufu to dip in it. Omasiri's portion was, as usual, much smaller and with no fish at all, just broth and a little lump of yam dough. Still, Omasiri bowed her head in thanks and ate quietly. The warm, savory soup was so soothing after the long day that she nearly cried from relief as she swallowed it. Okori, who had been out helping a friend in a nearby village and returned late, noticed the tiny portion Omasiri got. He knew better than to speak up at the table, as that often made Nneka angry later, but he caught Omasiri's eyes and subtly moved his bowl toward her when Nneka and Amaka were distracted, letting her sip a little extra soup from his portion. It was his way of apologizing for not being able to do more. Omasiri gave him the faintest smile of gratitude. After dinner, Omasiri cleaned up, washing the bowls and scrubbing the cooking pot in the dim light. By the time all her work was finished, the moon and stars were out, and the rest of the household was preparing for bed. Omasiri finally retired to her own little corner of the hut, a small mat on the floor with a threadbare blanket. Her muscles throbbed and her skin was scratched in many places from the day's labors. Yet, as she lay down, she gazed through the small open window at the twinkling stars. Despite everything, she whispered a short prayer. Dear gods of our land, thank you for seeing me through another day. Dear ancestors, especially Mama Ifunaya, watch over me tonight. This simple ritual gave her comfort. She believed her mother's spirit and the ancestors heard her. In the darkness, Omasiri imagined what her life might be like if her mother was still alive or if Nneka were kind. Perhaps by now she would have learned to weave cloth or sing the folk songs freely, maybe even have friends to laugh with. A hot tear slid down her cheek at those thoughts, but she brushed it away. I will endure, she told herself. Maybe someday things will change. With that resolution in her weary heart, Omasiri closed her eyes. The crickets sang their nightly song outside, and eventually she drifted into a deep, exhausted sleep. Thus passed a typical day in young Omasiri's life. Treated like a servant by her stepmother and stepsister, she toiled from morning to night with little rest or kindness. Yet, through it all, Omasiri tried to remain good and respectful, holding on to the gentle teachings of her late mother. Little did she know that the gods of the land were indeed watching, and that her destiny, though seemingly buried under hardship, was quietly unfolding, leading her toward a future no one in Udi could have imagined. As days passed, Omasiri continued to endure the same harsh routine under Nneka's watch. Each day seemed to bring new difficulties, but one particular day would become a turning point in her life. It began like any other. Before dawn, Omasiri was already awake, sweeping the compound and preparing for the tasks ahead. Her arms still ached from the previous day's labor, but she dared not show any sign of weakness in front of Nneka. That morning, Nneka had an especially long list of chores for Omasiri. After the usual sweeping and fetching of water, Nneka announced sharply, Today, you must clear the new patch of land by the river for planting. I want it done before sundown. And don't forget to gather extra firewood. The wood you brought yesterday is almost finished. Do you hear me? Yes, Mama, Omasiri replied quietly. Inside, her heart sank at the thought of the long, hard day ahead. The patch of land by the river was full of stubborn grasses and thorny shrubs that needed to be cut and cleared. It was a much bigger task than usual. But Omasiri steeled herself. I can do this, she whispered. I have to. She set down her basket and began to work immediately. First, she took the cutlass and began slicing through the tall grasses. She swung the blade carefully but firmly, cutting swaths of grass and tossing them aside. The wet grass from the morning dew clung to her skirt and arms, and soon her clothes were damp. Occasionally, she winced as the cutlass jarred in her hand when hitting tougher woody stems. By mid-morning, under the growing warmth of the sun, Omasiri had cleared a sizable portion of the plot of the tall grass. She tied the cut grass into bundles to carry off or use as livestock further later. The next were the thorny shrubs scattered across the plot. These were more challenging. Some had short, sharp thorns that pricked her fingers when she grabbed them. Omasiri used the cutlass to hack them down as close to the root as possible. At times, a thorn would catch her skin. She got several scratches on her arms. She bit her lip and kept going. By the time the sun stood high in the sky, approaching noon, Omasiri was exhausted and drenched in sweat. She paused for a moment under the shade of a solitary palm tree at the edge of the plot. Her throat was dry and her stomach growled in hunger. She had brought a small gourd of water. She drank a few sips sparingly, knowing she needed to save some later, and then leaned against the tree trunk to catch her breath. All around her lay piles of cut grass and bushes. There was still more to clear, including digging out some roots with her hoe, but she had made progress. As she rested, Omasiri closed her eyes for a minute. The palm tree's shade was cool and inviting. Her body begged for a longer rest, maybe to curl up right there and sleep. She was so tired. The previous day's labors plus the morning's work had drained her. For a moment, she imagined lying down on the soft grass and just napping. But the memory of Nneka's stern order "I want it done before sundown," jolted Omasiri awake. She knew if she failed to finish, Nneka would accuse her of slacking, or worse, make her finish in the dark and still punish her. Reluctantly, Omasiri pushed herself back up. Her muscles protested as she stood. She stretched her sore back and wiped her brow. "Just a bit more," she encouraged herself, picking up the hoe to tackle the remaining roots and stumps. The afternoon sun grew intense. Omasiri methodically dug around the base of each stubby bush stump and pried it up with the hoe. It was slow, grueling work. With each thrust of the hoe into the soil, her arms trembled from fatigue. Sweat poured down her face and back. She took brief pauses every now and then, standing up straight to relieve her back and fanning herself with a broad leaf. Once, she accidentally disturbed an anthill while uprooting a shrub. Angry red ants swarmed out, crawling over her feet and biting. Omasiri yelped quietly and quickly brushed them off her legs. The bites stung fiercely, leaving little burning welts on her skin. She blinked away a few tears, not just from the pain of the bites, but from the overwhelm of her situation. Here she was, alone under the brutal sun, battling weeds and ants, with an empty belly and no one to help or care. It felt unfair, but who could she tell? Crying would not clear the field or soften Nneka's heart. So, Omasiri took a deep breath and continued the task. By late afternoon, miraculously, she had cleared nearly the entire plot. Only a small corner remained when she realized daylight was beginning to wane. The sun was descending, casting long shadows from the trees. Her body was on the verge of collapse. She felt lightheaded from hunger and hard work. Still, she thought of Nneka's likely reaction if the job was incomplete. "I must finish, just a little more," she urged herself. Finally, as the sky started to take on a golden hue of early evening, Omasiri uprooted the last tuft of stubborn grass. It was done. The new plot was cleared, with debris piled neatly on one side. She had fulfilled Nneka's order. Omasiri sank to the ground for a moment, breathing hard, but feeling a tiny spark of pride. Despite the odds, she had accomplished the task. "Maybe now Nneka will not be angry with me today," she murmured to herself. Perhaps, just perhaps, Nneka might even allow her a bit more food for supper if she knew how enormous the job had been. But her day was not over. She still had to gather extra firewood as instructed, and the sun was already close to setting behind the treetops. Her body begged to rest, but Omasiri forced herself up again. Using the last bit of daylight, she walked along the edge of the nearby forest to collect dry wood. She found a fallen tree branch and used her cutlass to chop it into manageable pieces. She also gathered various twigs. She made a bundle with a length of fiber rope, tying it tight. Twilight was deepening by the time Omasiri lifted the bundle of wood onto her head. It was heavier than the bundle she'd carried the day before. She had really pushed to gather a lot, wanting to ensure Nneka would have no cause to complain. With one hand steadying the load and the other holding her hoe and cutlass, Omasiri began the trek home. The world around her was growing dim and tinged with purple. Crickets and frogs had begun their chorus, and a few fireflies blinked in the bushes. Normally, Omasiri would have been home by now, starting the fire for dinner. "I must hurry," she thought. She didn't want Nneka to accuse her of slacking, or worse, of doing something improper while away from home. However, as she hurried along the narrow path back to the village, fatigue finally caught up in a dangerous way. In the dusk light, Omasiri didn't see a tree root snaking across the path. Her foot caught it and she stumbled forward. With her hands full and the heavy load on her head, she couldn't catch herself. She fell hard on her knees and palms. The bundle of firewood tumbled off her head, pieces scattering. Her hoe clanged as it hit a stone and her cutlass slipped from her grasp. Pain shot through her knees and hands where they scraped the ground. Omasiri gasped, biting her lip to keep from crying out loud. Slowly, she pushed herself to a sitting position on the dirt path. The twilight was making it hard to see, but she felt warm wetness on her knees, likely blood from the scrapes. Her palms were gritty and hurt as well. For a moment, Omasiri did something she rarely allowed herself to do. She broke down and cried openly. There was no one around to see or hear as she sat there in the middle of the path in the growing darkness. It was all too much. The exhaustion, the hunger, the fear of Nneka's reaction if she returned late. She was just a young girl, and she felt utterly worn out and alone. Wrapping her arms around her, she sobbed quietly, tears streaming down her dusty cheeks. After a short while, the chorus of nighttime insects and the distant hoot of an owl reminded her she was still out in the open in the coming night. She sniffled and wiped her face with the back of her hand. She had to get home. Crying would not get her there. Summoning her willpower, Omasiri gathered the scattered pieces of firewood back into a bundle. Her knees throbbed, or she could feel they were raw and bleeding a bit, but she forced herself to stand. It was now truly dark. The moon, a thin crescent, offered little light, and the stars were just beginning to peep out. Omasiri realized with panic that this was the first time she had ever been out alone this late. She was a village girl. By sunset, she was always home, because night in the countryside can be frightening for a child. Stories of spirits wandering at night and the very real threat of wild animals or snakes suddenly flooded her mind. A bush rustled nearby and Omasiri jumped, her heart pounding. It was likely just a small animal, maybe a lizard or rodent, but in her anxious state, she imagined something worse. Hugging herself, she whispered a shaky prayer. "Ancestors, protect me. Please let me get home safely." Summoning every ounce of strength, Omasiri lifted the bundle back onto her head. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, wooden and unsteady, but she willed them to move. She walked as fast as she dared in the darkness along the familiar path. The village was not too far now. She could even see a faint glow of a cooking fire through the trees in the distance. Meanwhile, back at Okore's compound, Nneka had indeed noticed that Omasiri was late. Dinner prep had been left unfinished because Omasiri wasn't back to tend the fire or fetch more water. Nneka was not concerned for her girl's safety. Instead, she was irritated and suspicious. What could that girl be doing? She fumed, pacing the yard. Amaka sat nearby, equally curious. Maybe she's being lazy and fell asleep under a tree, she suggested with a snicker. Or maybe, she added with a sly tone, she met a boy on the way and is chatting instead of walking. This was a baseless accusation, but aimed to provoke Nneka's temper further. At that suggestion, Nneka's face darkened. In their community, a young girl seen lingering with a boy unchaperoned would be viewed as behaving improperly. If she's doing such disgraceful things, I swear. Nneka didn't finish the threat, but her hand instinctively grabbed a thin switch, a cane she sometimes used for discipline. Okore, who had returned home and had been quietly listening from the porch of the hut, interjected gently. It's not like Omasiri to be late without reason. The new fan patch is far. Perhaps the work took longer than expected. I can go and look for... Nneka whirled on him, eyes flashing. You will do no such thing. Always quick to defend her, aren't you? If she isn't back yet, it means she's slacking or up to no good. Let her face the consequences when she returns. Okore opened his mouth to argue, but thought better of it. He knew Nneka's anger at this moment would only escalate if he pushed. Instead, he sat back down with a worried frown, silently praying that his daughter was all right and would come home immediately. When Omasiri finally reached the edge of the compound, she was trembling with both fear and relief. Relief because she could see the outline of their hut and the glow of the hearth. She was home. Fear because she knew Nneka would be furious at her lateness. It was fully dark now, with only the moon and a lantern Nneka had hung near the hut door casting light. As Omasiri stepped into the clearing compound, Nneka was already standing at the doorway with that switch in hand. So, the prodigal girl returns, she said in a dangerously low voice. Omasiri quickly set down the firewood and her tools by the shed. Mama, I'm sorry I'm late, she began in a desperate tone. I finished the field as you asked, but it was very large. Then I gathered a lot of wood and it got dark and I fell on the path. Quiet, Nneka snapped, her voice rising. She stepped forward, the switch quivering in her hand. In the dim light, she could now see Omasiri's state, covered in dirt, knees bloodied, eyes red from crying. But Nneka's heart had long been hardened towards any compassion. In fact, she interpreted Omasiri's tears as evidence of guilt. You expect me to believe that's why you are late, you lazy, lying girl. It's the truth, pleaded Omasiri, voice shaking. I cleared everything, Mama. You can ask anyone near the river. I didn't speak to anyone or stop to rest except a moment. I fell because it was dark, not because I was doing anything bad." Nneka would hear none of it. In her mind, Omasiri's lateness and disheveled appearance confirmed the worst. Maybe Amaka's offhand guess that she might have been with a boy took root. Or maybe Nneka simply wanted to unleash her frustration. Whatever the case, she raised the switch. "You dare come home at this hour and make excuses? I have been waiting to cook because of you. No supper has been made and it's entirely your fault. You are likely lying about the field too. I bet you didn't finish it." Okore stepped forward from the shadows, speaking up. "Her legs look hurt, Nneka. Perhaps we should hear her out. And I can help cook something quick." But Nneka silenced him with a glare. "Stay out of this, Okore. This is between me and your wayward daughter." Nneka then pointed the switch at Omasiri. "Mark my words, girl. If you think you can roam about and do as you please, you are very mistaken. The punishment for coming home so late and making us all worry," here Omasiri almost wanted to protest that Nneka never truly worried about her, but she kept silent, "will be severe." She grabbed Omasiri's arm with a claw-like grip and dragged her towards the hut. Omasiri stumbled, crying out, "Mama, please, I'm sorry, it won't happen again." "You are right, it won't," hissed Nneka, "because you won't have a chance to repeat this." With that ominous statement, Nneka pushed Omasiri roughly out of the hut doorway. The girl fell backwards off the low porch onto the ground. She looked up in confusion and fear. Nneka stood over her and said in a cold, hard voice, "You will not sleep in this house tonight. You will sleep outside and think about what you've done." Omasiri's eyes widened. Outside? It was a cool night, and the compound had no protective walls. Sleeping outside was something only goats or guard dogs did, not young girls. It was both humiliating and risky, exposing her to mosquitoes at best, snakes, or other harm. Behind Nneka, Amaka peered out with a triumphant little smirk on her face, clearly pleased at this development. Okore rushed to the door. "Nneka, no, that's too much. She's just a child." "If you feel sorry for her, go and keep her company then," Nneka snapped at her husband. Okore was torn. He looked at his daughter, who was cowering on the ground, and his face contorted in anguish. But Nneka's threat was real. He knew if he disobeyed her ultimatum, she might truly toss him out as well, or make life even more miserable. Nneka glared at him with such fury that Okore felt a chill. In that moment, much to his shame later, he yielded. He stepped back into the hut silently, tears in his eyes. Omasiri reached out a hand towards the door. "Papa," she whimpered softly. She didn't blame him. She knew how Nneka bullied him too. But she desperately wished he would scoop her up and insist she sleep inside, or at least give her a blanket. But Nneka slammed the hut door shut. There was the loud sound of the wooden bolt inside being latched. Omasiri was effectively locked out of her home. The night air was cool and growing colder. A few clouds drifted over the moon, darkening the compound. Omasiri stood shakily, looking around. She felt utterly alone and frightened. A sob rose in her throat, but she stifled it. If Nneka heard her crying loudly, she might come out and beat her for disturbing the night. Sniffling, Omasiri limped towards the small shed at the side of the compound where tools and spare mats were kept. It had 3 walls and a little thatched roof, not fully enclosed, but at least it offered some shelter from the night dew. Inside, she found a rolled-up old wrapper. With trembling hands, she spread it on the dirt floor. It was thin, but better than nothing. She lay down on it, curling up to keep herself warm. Above her, the stars winked through gaps in the shed's thatch. Omasiri drew her threadbare wrapper around herself tightly. She could hear Nneka and Amaka's muffled voices from inside the hut. Amaka was gleefully saying something, and Nneka's low voice responding. Probably they were talking about her, happy to have cast her out. Tears slid from Omasiri's eyes, soaking silently into the mat. "What have I done to deserve this?" she whispered to the night. She tried to think of any sin or mistake of hers that merited such cruelty, but she knew in her heart it was not her wrongdoing. It was Nneka's hatred. Hatred she didn't even understand the cause of. As she shivered, Omasiri did the only thing she could. She prayed. In a choked voice, she spoke to the sky. "O gods of our land, why is my life so full of pain? I work hard, I obey, yet I am treated like this. If I have done wrong unknowingly, forgive me. But if not, then I ask, please help me. I am so tired of suffering. She wiped her nose and continued in a trembling voice. Ancestors, you see my heart. I don't know how long I can live like this. I'm not even afraid to die anymore if it ends this misery. I just wish I knew there was a purpose to all of this. After pouring her heart out, Omasiri felt a strange calm come over her. The night was still and quiet, as if listening. A faint breeze rustled the plantain leaves nearby, and for a moment, Omasiri almost imagined it was a gentle hand stroking her head, comforting her. She closed her eyes, exhausted beyond measure. And there, on the hard ground of the shed with the vast sky as her ceiling, the young girl finally fell asleep. She did not know it, but forces greater than any wicked stepmother were already stirring. The darkest hour of night would soon give way to a dawn of fate that would change Omasiri's life forever. While Omasiri endured hardship in her father's compound, the wider kingdom of Udi was facing a crisis of its own. Trouble had quietly entered Udi, and soon it would intertwine with Omasiri's fate. In the kingdom's capital village, there was a great commotion. King Madu, the ruler of Udi for many years, had died suddenly and unexpectedly. One evening he was healthy, and by the next morning he had passed away in his sleep. The people of Udi were shocked and plunged in mourning. King Madu had been a wise and just leader, and his loss was felt deeply by all. According to the traditions of Udi, upon the death of a king, called the Eze in their language, certain sacred rituals had to be observed. One of the most important traditions concerned the royal seal of Udi. This royal seal was a carved emblem, a sort of crest of the kingdom that had been passed down through generations of kings. It was said to carry the blessings and authority of the ancestors. No new king could be crowned without this sacred royal seal present at the coronation. It was the tangible symbol that the ancestors approved of the new reign. Normally, the royal seal was kept in the palace shrine under the care of the chief priest. But on the night King Madu died, something unthinkable happened. The royal seal disappeared. When the chief priest, Dibia Eziano, went to retrieve the seal for safekeeping after the king's passing, he found the shrine's usual hiding place empty. The intricate bronze seal, which had an image of a coiled serpent and a rising sun, symbolizing wisdom and renewal, was gone. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. This disappearance threw the royal court into panic. The elders of Udi gathered in an emergency council at the main shrine compound near the palace. They lit oil lamps and burned incense, the aromatic smoke curling in the night air as they discussed what could have happened. Some feared it was a bad omen. Perhaps the gods were displeased, or perhaps some enemy had stolen it to prevent Udi from installing a new king. Chief Priest Eziano was an old wise man with white chalk markings on his body and a necklace of animal teeth around his neck, signifying his role. He raised his hands for silence among the worried elders and spoke gravely. This is not a small matter. The ancestors speak through events such as these. For the royal seal to go missing on the very night our king joined the ancestors, it is a powerful sign. We must be careful and seek guidance. One elder, pausing from nervously stroking his grey beard, asked in a trembling voice, Dibia, what do the spirits say? How can we crown the next king without the seal? What will become of our kingdom? The chief priest closed his eyes and shook a rattle filled with seeds, seeking a sign. After a moment, he opened his eyes and announced, until the sacred royal seal is found, no man must sit on the throne. Any coronation performed without the seal's presence would anger the gods and bring destruction to Udi. His words fell like a pronouncement of doom in the silent, incense-thick air. The elders looked at each other with worry, but they respected the chief priest's wisdom and knew the seriousness of the tradition. If the ancestors required the seal, they dare not crown a king without it. The rightful heir to the throne of Udi was a young man named Obina. Obina was the son of Elder Dike, a respected leader who was King Madu's cousin and closest advisor. Since King Madu had left no direct son, the succession passed to Obina by bloodline and the elders' approval. Obina was in his mid-20s, strong and tall, known across Udi for his prowess in wrestling and his charismatic presence. Many believed he would be a good king. He was brave and had a commanding air. However, Obina also carried a streak of pride. He was well aware of his social standing and could be headstrong. For now, Elder Dike, who was Obina's father, took on the role of regent, which meant he temporarily performed the duties of the king until a formal coronation could take place. This was intended to be a short interim period. But as days turned to weeks with no sign of the royal seal, the coronation remained in limbo, and anxiety simmered in the kingdom. The village criers were sent out every morning to make announcements. They walked through every hamlet, beating a small gong and shouting news. Hear all, hear all, the sacred royal seal is missing. Until it is found, the coronation of Prince Obina is postponed. All citizens are called upon to pray and search their environs for any sign of it. The gods are testing us. We must remain patient and faithful. People whispered in market and at the riverbanks. What could have happened to the seal? Some speculated that a thief, maybe from a rival kingdom, had stolen into the palace that night, hoping to destabilize Udi. Others wondered if the chief priest might have hidden it himself as a form of spiritual test. A few more superstitious folks even suggested that King Madu's spirit was unhappy and had taken the seal with him to the other side. Obina, the would-be king, was deeply frustrated by this situation. On one hand, he was mourning his kinsman King Madu, whom he had admired. On the other, he was eager, almost restless to assume the throne and begin his reign. Every sunrise that he awoke without being the officially crowned king felt like an affront to him. He had prepared his whole life for this role, and now a missing piece of metal was blocking it. One warm evening, Obina was sparring with a friend in the palace courtyard to let off some steam. He wrestled aggressively, easily pinning his opponent, but there was a scowl on his face even as he won. After dismissing his friend, Obina paced around the courtyard, shirtless and still breathing heavily from the exercise, his mind churning. His father, Elder Dike, approached quietly. "My son, you are troubled," the older man observed. Obina stopped and faced his father. "Wouldn't you be, father? I am ready to lead. The people expect me to lead, and yet I cannot wear the crown because of some stubborn tradition about a seal," he burst out, his tone a mix of anger and impatience. Elder Dike placed a steady hand on Obina's shoulder. "I understand your frustration, but we must honor the ways of our ancestors. The chief priest is firm in his message. Without the seal, we dare not crown you. We cannot risk a curse or misfortune by defying that." Obina clicked his tongue, a gesture of vexation. Perhaps the chief priest is being overcautious. Maybe the seal was simply stolen by a greedy man, not by the god's design. Why should our whole kingdom be held hostage by this? Every day I sit idle, problems brew. I hear whispers that some distant relatives are eyeing the throne since I am not yet crowned. It's an insult. His father nodded gravely. He too had heard those whispers. Minor nobles stirring trouble, hinting that perhaps the missing seal was a sign Obina shouldn't be king. "Obina, listen," Elder Dike said calmly. Sometimes the ancestors test our patience. A leader must show not only strength but also wisdom and humility in the face of the unknown. Perhaps this delay is to teach you something. Humility? Obina echoed with a slight frown. He knew his father meant well, but it was hard to swallow. Father, I have been patient. I have shown respect, but each day this situation continues, it makes me appear weak or accursed in the eyes of some. I cannot tolerate that indefinitely. Elder Daike sighed. We will find the seal, my son. The priests are praying and performing divinations. The villagers are keeping watch for any clue. We must trust the gods a little longer. Don't let pride make you do something rash. You will be king when it is the right time. Obina turned away and gazed at the horizon, where the sun had set and the first stars twinkled. He said nothing more, but Elder Daike's words hung in the air. A test of humility. A true leader yields to the god's timing. Obina understood, but it was not easy for him. In his heart, he vowed silently, seal or no seal, I will not let anyone or anything take what is mine. If the gods won't reveal it soon, maybe I'll find a way myself. It was a bold, perhaps impious thought, but one born of his growing desperation. Amidst all this royal turmoil, there was another matter occupying Obina's mind. Something, or rather someone, completely unrelated to the missing seal. That person was Omasiri. Obina had first noticed Omasiri some months before King Madu's death on one of his informal outings. He occasionally dressed in plain clothes and went to the marketplace incognito to feel the pulse of the ordinary people. On one such day, he had seen a scene that stuck with him. A weary-looking girl selling vegetables at a stall while an older woman, Neka, scolded her over arranging the produce. The girl had quietly complied, arranging yams and peppers even as the woman's words grew harsh. Obina's attention had been drawn to the girl, not just because she was, even in simple clothes, quite beautiful in a delicate way, but because of the patience and quiet strength he sensed in her as she endured the scolding without lashing back. He asked the guard discreetly who that girl was. The guard knew Okore's family and whispered, "That is Omasiri, daughter of Okore. Her mother died long ago. The woman shouting at her is her stepmother. They treat the poor girl like a servant." Obina felt a stir of pity and empathy. Something about Omasiri's resigned posture and sad eyes as she handed a customer a yam resonated with him. Later, he had seen her again by chance. He was riding on the outskirts of the village with two companions, headed to inspect a distant pasture. Along a narrow path, he saw a young girl struggling with a heavy bundle of firewood on her head and an empty water pot balanced on top of it. As he approached, he recognized the face. It was Omasiri, looking exhausted under that burden, but still moving with determination. Obina slowed his horse, almost ready to stop and offer help, but his status held him back. How would he explain a prince carrying firewood for a village girl? Instead, he watched with admiration how Omasiri adjusted the bundle without complaining or asking anyone nearby for assistance. Even though there were a few other villagers on the road, in that moment, Obina thought, such quiet strength and dignity. Many others might have begged the passing noble for assistance, but Omasiri did not even notice him. She was focused on her duty. From that day, Omasiri occupied a place in Obina's thoughts. Amidst court discussions and warriors training, he would occasionally find his mind wandering to the image of the humble girl with the haunting eyes. In a way, her calm resilience under hardship made her stand out more to him than the well-adorned ladies of the court who smiled and curtsied for him with practiced elegance. Thus, even while the kingdom waited for the seal to be found, Obina's heart had made a decision. He wanted Omasiri to be his wife. It was not yet love, he hardly knew her personally, but it was a deep attraction and respect that he hadn't felt for anyone else. And Obina was a man used to getting what he wanted. One afternoon, unable to dismiss his thoughts of her any longer, Obina decided to act on his desire. He called one of his trusted attendants, a young man named Ugo. "Go to Okore's compound," he instructed. "There is a girl there named Omasiri. Tell her the prince requests her presence at the palace compound this evening. Be polite, don't scare her, but make sure she understands it's important and not really optional." Ugo bowed, suppressing a small smile, for he had heard a bit of gossip around the palace that the prince had eyes on some village maiden. "Yes, my prince, I will bring her," he said, and set off. By this time, Omasiri's life had only grown more difficult in the wake of that terrible night she was forced to sleep outside. True to her word, Ineka had made things worse. She accused Omasiri of bringing shame to the family with the unfounded insinuation that being out late meant she was doing something dishonorable, and used that as justification to be even more brutal. For days after, Omasiri was given almost no food, a punishment for stealing time and dishonoring the household, Ineka claimed. Okorie tried to sneak her scraps, but even he was mostly cowed by Ineka's wrath, which seemed to have only grown. By the day Ugo arrived, Omasiri was weak from hunger and constant labor, but still carrying on. She was in the yard winnowing grains, tossing them in a flat basket to let the breeze carry away the chaff, when the palace messenger walked into the compound. "Good day," Ugo greeted, looking at Omasiri. She paused her work and noticed the well-dressed young man and the royal insignia on the pendant he wore. Immediately, she became nervous. Why was a palace person here? "Good day, sir," she answered quietly, setting down the basket and bowing her head slightly in respect. Ineka, who had been inside, heard voices and stepped out. She immediately noticed the stranger's well-adorned attire and the way he carried himself. "Greetings, how can we help you?" she asked with a forced polite smile. Rare for her, but she could be ingratiating to outsiders. Ugo inclined his head. "I am a messenger from the palace. I have come to speak with Omasiri, daughter of Okorie." Omasiri's heart nearly stopped. The palace? Me? She couldn't imagine why. Had she done something wrong? Or was it about the missing seal? But how could it be? She glanced at Ineka, whose eyes flashed with a mix of surprise and suspicion. "This is Omasiri," Ineka said, a slight edge to her voice. "What business does the palace have with her?" Ugo kept a respectful tone. "His Highness Prince Obina requests that Omasiri come to the palace compound this evening. He wishes to speak with her." The yard fell silent for a moment. Omasiri was stunned. Prince Obina, the future king, wanted to speak to her? She had only seen him at a distance during public occasions. Why would he want to speak to someone like her? She felt a flutter of fear and perhaps a tiny spark of curiosity or flattered pride, but mostly fear. And Obina was a man used to getting what he wanted. Nine's mind raced. She too was puzzled, but quickly her puzzlement morphed into a kind of greedy excitement. Perhaps the prince had noticed Omasiri somewhere, and could it be he was interested in her? It sounded like it. And if so, what an opportunity. Even if Ineka disliked Omasiri, the idea that the prince might favor her had many implications. Outwardly, Ineka didn't show her sudden scheming thoughts. She simply said, "Well, Omasiri, what are you waiting for? Go wash your face and feet. You can't appear before the prince looking like a little beggar." Her words were harsh, but her tone had an unusual lightness. Perhaps in that moment, Ineka imagined the benefits if Omasiri attracted the prince. Maybe gifts or favor could trickle to the family, or maybe she was just curious what would happen. Omasiri quickly washed up at the water clay pot, scrubbing the dust from her face and the chaff from her arms, and tidied her hair as best as she could, tying a simple piece of cloth around it. Her heart pounded the entire time. She returned to Ugo, who had waited patiently. "I'm ready," she said softly. Ugo gestured for her to follow. "We should go before the sun sets." Ineka watched them leave the compound as Omasiri walked out the gate following the royal messenger. Amaka whispered behind Ineka, "Mother, why the prince wants her?" There was envy in her voice. Ineka narrowed her eyes, thinking hard. Maybe if that stupid girl knows what is good for her, maybe she will make him favor her and we will all benefit. Then she added under her breath, almost chuckling, "Who would have thought?" Amaka frowned, not liking this development at all. The idea that Omasiri might become someone important upset the very balance of her world, which always had Omasiri below her. But Ineka patted her shoulder. "Don't worry yet. The snake that sheds its skin is still a snake. I doubt she has the sense to take advantage, but if she does, we must be clever." Meanwhile, Omasiri followed Ugo along the village paths to the palace. She walked a few steps behind him, nervous and silent. Villagers they passed looked on curiously. A few women whispered, recognizing Omasiri and wondering why a palace escort was with her. Omasiri herself was trying to calm the storm of questions in her mind. Why does the prince want to see me? Have I done something wrong? The most she could think of was maybe, just maybe, he had noticed her in the market or heard of her hard work and wanted to hire her for palace service. That might be a positive reason. She'd heard of royal households taking in diligent commoners as servants or attendants. If I could work in the palace, she thought fleetingly, I might escape Neka's torment. The idea was both hopeful and scary. Leaving home for a palace job would be a big change. Soon, they reached the palace gates, a large wooden gate decorated with carvings of historical victories. 2 guards were posted there. They recognized Ugo and let them in, though they gave Omasiri curious glances. Inside, the palace compound was bustling with activity. Though it was evening, servants were still going about lighting oil lamps, and a few elders were meeting under a gazebo, discussing matters by torchlight. It was far grander than anything Omasiri had seen up close. She felt out of place, acutely aware of her plain attire and dusty sandals on the polished ground. Ugo led her to a quieter side of the compound where a small open pavilion stood with a few stools and a low table. Please wait here. I will inform the prince you have arrived, he said kindly. Omasiri nodded and remained standing, not daring to sit until told. She wiped her slightly sweaty palms on her skirt and tried to steady her breathing. She prayed silently for confidence. Within a few minutes, though to Omasiri it felt much longer, Prince Obinna emerged from one of the buildings and walked toward the pavilion. He was dressed casually by royal standards, a simple yet elegant cotton tunic and trousers, with a coral bead necklace, a sign of nobility, around his neck. Still, he carried an aura of authority and confidence. 2 attendants followed at a respectful distance. Omasiri's heart thudded. She had seen him before, but never this close. He was tall and well-built, with strong features. She quickly dropped to her knees and bowed her head in a gesture of respect and greeting. Your Highness, she managed to say softly. Obinna stepped up to her, a warm smile on his face. You must be Omasiri, he said. His voice was deep but gentle at that moment. Please, stand up. You don't need to kneel now. Omasiri stood slowly, keeping her eyes lowered politely. Yes, Your Highness, I am Omasiri. I dare not speak more than necessary. Prince Obinna looked at her closely now in the light of the pavilion's hanging lamp. Even in her simple clothes, a smudge of dust still on her cheek, and with an expression of timid uncertainty, she was striking to him. He noted the slight bruises on her arms and the healing scrape on her knees, signs of her hard life. These details endeared her more. He felt a surge of protectiveness and admiration. He motioned to a small carved stool. Please, sit if you like, he offered, which surprised Omasiri. It was an honor to be invited to sit in front of a prince. She hesitated, but then perched on the very edge of the stool, back straight, hands folded nervously in her lap. Obinna took a seat on a larger stool opposite her. For a moment, he didn't speak, as if studying what to say. Omasiri kept her eyes on her hands or the floor, unsure if it was appropriate to look directly at him. The silence made her more anxious. Obinna finally broke the silence in a kind tone. I've seen you a few times in the village, at the market, on the farm road. You probably didn't notice me on those occasions, but you caught my attention with your hard work and your spirit. He paused, waiting to see if she would respond. Omasiri glanced up just for a second in surprise, then back down. She was bewildered that a prince would take notice of her at all. Your Highness is generous to say so. I just do what I must each day, she said softly. Obinna leaned forward slightly, trying to put her at ease. I know your life has not been easy, Omasiri. I've heard how your mother died and and I am aware that your stepmother isn't kind to you." Omasiri's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and pain at hearing that acknowledged by the prince. She didn't want to badmouth her family, but it was no secret in the village. I manage, Your Highness. I try to honor my father's household and the memory of my mother by working hard." Her answer, modest and free of complaint despite everything, impressed Obinna greatly. He smiled gently. "You have a very good heart. Many in your place would be bitter or angry, but you endure with grace. I admire that." This was beyond anything Omasiri expected. Her heart pounded. Was the prince actually praising her? She felt she must be very careful now. "Thank you, my prince. I simply do what I feel is right. The gods give me strength." Obinna decided to make his intentions clear. He motioned and one of his attendants stepped forward holding a bundle wrapped in fine cloth. Obinna took the bundle and placed it on the table. He unfolded it to reveal some gifts, a length of beautiful patterned fabric in rich colors for making a dress, a pair of ornate beaded slippers, and a small necklace of coral beads. Omasiri's eyes widened a fraction. These were the kind of gifts given to a maiden courted by someone wealthy or noble. "Omasiri," Obinna began, "I have brought you these tokens of my esteem." He gently pushed the gifts toward her. "I would like you to have them." Omasiri looked at the lovely items, then back down, her mind reeling. No one had ever given her such fine things. But with the gifts came a wave of confusion and fear, because she understood what such offerings typically meant. I am honored, Your Highness. This is more than I deserve." She did not reach out to touch them. Obinna then cleared his throat slightly and spoke with a tender boldness. "Omasiri, I'll be direct. I have captured my heart. Your beauty, yes, but even more so your character and strength. I would like you to become my wife." Though Omasiri had begun to suspect this might be his intention, hearing the words spoken plainly still sent a shock through her. She gasped softly and raised her eyes to look at him for the first time fully. Obinna's expression was earnest and gentle, yet confident, like someone giving a gift he was sure would be accepted. In that instant, a flurry of emotions hit Omasiri. Flattered astonishment that a prince, the future king, wanted her as a wife. Fear of what that life might entail, worry about her father, and an ingrained sense of unworthiness planted by years of being told she was nothing. She opened her mouth, but no words came out initially. Obinna, misreading her speechlessness as mere shyness or joy, continued enthusiastically. "If you agree, you will live here in the palace. You will no longer have to toil like a servant. You will wear the best clothes, eat the finest foods. I will ensure your father is well cared for too. He will want for nothing. And when I am crowned, which will be as soon as the seal is found, you would be my queen." He smiled, as if imagining her transformation from village girl to queen and expecting her delight. Omasiri finally found her voice, though it quivered. "Your Highness, this is a great honor you show me. I am truly surprised." She took a breath, feeling her throat dry. She had to be very respectful, yet honest. Her heart was pounding so hard it almost hurt. Did she want this? It was like a dream someone might conjure, escaping her cruel life to become royalty. But dreams and reality are different. She thought of life in the palace. Would it truly be better? Or would she face new pains? She hardly knew Obinna personally beyond his reputation and what she saw. What if he turned out to be a harsh husband? And leaving her father alone with Neka and Amaka troubled her deeply. Obinna waited, expecting an eager acceptance. When none was immediately forthcoming, his pride tinged with a bit of impatience. He leaned slightly forward. "Omasiri, I know it is sudden. You can take a moment, but you should know many girls in Udi would jump at such an offer. I chose you because I feel you are special. Do you understand what I am asking? I am asking you to stand by my side as my wife." Omasiri understood very well, perhaps too well. She lowered her head again, tears now gathering in her eyes not out of joy but out of stress and emotional turmoil. How could she explain her reservations without offending him? She felt grateful for his admiration, but her heart, after all it had been through, was weary of believing in sudden rescues or good fortune. She was also frankly scared of the unknown, scared of not having control, and she did not love him. She barely knew him. He was handsome and had been kind in this meeting, but love? Her heart was too bruised for love yet. Softly, she began to speak, her voice shaking. "Your Highness, you honor me beyond measure. I never imagined someone of your station would look upon me in this way. Truly, I am overwhelmed." A tear slipped down her cheek despite her trying to hold it in. "But my life has been very hard and my heart is tired. I fear I do not know how to be happy even if such gifts are given to me. I am afraid that if I come to the palace, I may bring you pain rather than joy because I carry so much sorrow inside me." Obinna was taken aback. He had expected perhaps modest hesitation, but not such a heartfelt, sorrowful reluctance. He reached out and gently took her hand, a bold move that made Omasiri quiver. "You will not bring me pain," he said, almost in disbelief that she thought so. "I want to make you happy, to take your sorrows away. Don't you see? You would no longer suffer. No stepmother to hurt you here. You would be free and loved." Omasiri bit her lip. Part of her was deeply tempted. Who wouldn't be? But something in her spirit, call it intuition or fear, held her back. "Your Highness, Obinna," she said, using his name softly, which made his attendants glance at each other. For a commoner to address him so was unusual, but he didn't seem to mind. "It's not that I don't appreciate your offer, but marriage is for life. My heart has been filled with so much sorrow that I don't know if I am ready to give it to someone, even a prince. I also worry about my father, leaving him alone with Nneka and Amaka." She meant Nneka and Amaka. "And I'm just a common girl. Palace life might be too great a change for me. I might fail at it." Obinna's initial patience began to ebb, replaced by incredulity and a hint of frustration. Was she actually refusing him? He, who could have his pick of noble daughters. It was a blow to his ego that he hadn't anticipated. He let go of her hand and stood up, pacing a step. "Omasiri, you worry too much. Your father will be cared for, I already promised. As for palace life, you will learn. Many queens were once common girls. They learn, they adapt. You would not fail with me to guide you. And your sorrows, I will replace them with joy if you let me. Why do you doubt this? Do you not trust that I mean what I say?" Omasiri stood as well, trembling. She realized with a sinking feeling that she was angering him, which was dangerous. Her instincts of self-preservation kicked in, and she knelt again, bowing her head, tears dripping on the pavement. "Please forgive me, Your Highness. I'm not ungrateful, I swear. You have been only gracious towards me. It's just that my heart is not ready. I've lived in fear and sadness for so long that I don't know if I can handle the happiness you promise. I fear it might just be a dream that could turn into more hurt." Prince Obinna looked at the girl kneeling before him and felt a mix of emotions, a strong desire to comfort her, but also a sting of pride at essentially being refused. He took a deep breath, trying to suppress irritation. He knelt down slightly so he could speak to her face, albeit she kept it downcast. "Look at me, Omasiri," he instructed softly. She lifted her face, eyes red and wet. Seeing her sadness, Obinna's anger cooled a bit, replaced by a feeling of urgency to reassure her. "I am not making empty promises. If you become my wife, I vow you will be respected and cherished. No one will ever harm you again. You will not live in fear. I am asking you to trust me." Omasiri felt the sincerity in his voice, and truly, Part of her wanted desperately to say yes, to escape, to be safe, to maybe even be loved. But something in her, perhaps the independence born from surviving alone, balked at giving up the little autonomy she had for a non-unknown life, even if it was golden. She also didn't feel worthy of being a prince's wife. Years of being called worthless made that idea seem unimaginable as reality. Her silence stretched too long. Obina's brows furrowed. He stood fully and stated in a firmer tone, not wanting to sound threatening but unable to hide his royal authority. Omasiri, think carefully. No common maiden refuses a prince. This is an opportunity to better your life and your father's. I am offering you comfort and position that many dream of. If you say no, do you truly wish to return to that house to be a servant and live in misery? I cannot understand. At that, Omasiri rose to her feet as well, albeit shakily. She was still crying, but something made her speak plainly through those tears, perhaps because she realized her next words might seal her fate either way. Your Highness, my mind, my heart, it's not that I wish to live in misery, but I am afraid of living the little life I know for something I don't know. I am afraid that I'll disappoint you, or that palace life will bring new kinds of pain I cannot handle. At least in my father's house, as bad as it is, I know what each day brings. In the palace, I might be lost or lonely in a different way. I'm sorry, I'm truly sorry. I mean no disrespect, but I cannot accept your proposal now. She finished in a whisper, eyes shut, bracing for his reaction. In her heart, she half expected him to explode in anger or laugh at her foolishness. Prince Obina felt as if he'd been splashed with cold water. Disbelief, then anger and insult flared in him. How could she refuse him? He had been gentle and generous. She spoke of fear and not being ready. It sounded almost like an excuse to him. Perhaps she simply didn't reciprocate his feelings. The thought bruised his ego terribly. His face hardened, losing the gentle warmth it had earlier. Very well, he said, voice cool and formal now. If that is your decision. He motioned abruptly and one of his attendants quickly stepped forward. Ugo, escort Miss Omasiri back to her home. Omasiri's eyes widened. She hadn't expected such a swift dismissal. Your Highness, please, I hope you can forgive. Obina raised a hand, not wanting to hear more. His pride was too wounded to continue entreating. You are free to go, Omasiri. I will not compel you. I only hope you do not later regret refusing what I've offered. There was a slight edge to his tone, unintended perhaps, but it was there. Trembling, Omasiri realized the meeting was over. She hadn't taken the gifts on the table. She couldn't possibly carry them back after saying no. She left them lying there neatly. She dropped into a curtsy. Thank you for your kindness. I am sorry, she whispered, voice breaking. Obina did not respond or look at her. He turned away, clenching his jaw. One attendant gathered the unused gifts and the other stepped back as well. Seeing the princess back to her, Omasiri took that as her cue to leave. Ugo gently gestured and began walking her out. She followed on unsteady legs, feeling a crushing mix of guilt, fear, and oddly, relief too. Relief that at least she had spoken her true feelings, even if it might have angered a powerful man. As they exited the gate, Ugo looked at Omasiri with sympathy and a bit of astonishment. He had never seen a girl turn down something like that. Did you really refuse him? He asked under his breath as they walked into the village. Omasiri wiped her tears and nodded silently. Ugo gave a low whistle of disbelief, but said nothing more. He escorted her all the way back to Okori's compound. The night had fully set in by now. At the compound, Nneka was waiting just inside the gate like a cat awaiting a mouse. The moment Omasiri entered, Nneka rushed up. Ugo had already departed, eager to be away from domestic drama. What happened? Nneka demanded, gripping Omasiri's arm tightly. Why did he send you back so soon? What did you do? Omasiri winced at the tight hold and shook her head, eyes down. He offered me to become his wife, Mama. Nneka's eyes went wide. and then flashed with excitement. But the excitement lasted only a second, replaced by shock at Omasiri's forlorn expression and presence here. Offered marriage? And you are here? You fool! What did you say? What did you do? Omasiri trembled as she answered. I told him I wasn't ready, that I was sorry, but I couldn't accept. You what? Nneka's scream rang out into the night. Amaka, who had been eavesdropping, gasped audibly. Nneka's face contorted with rage, such as Omasiri had never seen. You turned him down? Have you gone mad, you ungrateful, stupid girl? Do you know what you've done? You threw away a chance for all of us. You could have been a queen. We could have been living in riches, and instead you come sniveling back here having insulted the prince? Nneka was beyond furious. In her eyes, Omasiri's hesitation had not only ruined Omasiri's own chance, but also Nneka's dreams of royal favor. Without warning, she slapped Omasiri hard across the face. The force of it made Omasiri stagger, and a hot sting blossomed on her cheek. How dare you, Nneka roared. How dare you ruin this? She advanced like a storm. Omasiri cowered, raising her hands instinctively to ward off more blows. Nneka struck her again on the shoulder and back with fists this time. After everything I've done for you, you repay me by shaming our family in front of the prince? Okori, hearing the commotion, rushed out of the hut. He saw Nneka raining blows on their daughter and leapt forward to grab her arm. Nneka, stop. Please stop. He held her back with difficulty. Though Nneka was not large, her anger made her strong. She struggled against Okori, breathing heavily, eyes wild. Omasiri crawled on the ground, sobbing, not from the pain of the blows, though they hurt, but from despair. It seemed no matter what she did, it ended in suffering. If she had accepted Obinna, she feared she'd be unhappy. She refused, and indeed here was misery as well. Nneka finally ceased struggling and yanked her arm free of Okori's grip. She pointed a shaking finger at Omasiri, who was trying to sit up. You will pay for this, Nneka snarled in a low, seething tone. Mark my words, girl. As long as you live under my roof, you will pay for what you've done tonight. Amaka stood in the background, arms folded, glaring at Omasiri with resentment and jealousy. She clearly shared her mother's sentiment that Omasiri had foolishly thrown away an opportunity that many would have killed for. Okori knelt by Omasiri and helped her up gently. He looked at her bruised face and wept silently. My child, why? He asked in a whisper, not accusatory, but heartbroken. He couldn't fully understand why she would refuse Obinna either, but he also felt guilt. Perhaps if he had raised her in more love and less fear, she would have had the confidence to embrace such a chance. Omasiri called to her father and just cried. She had no answer that would satisfy any of them. She could only say in between sobs, Papa, I was scared. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Nneka overheard that and let out a bitter laugh. Scared? You should be scared of what's coming, you foolish girl. From now on, don't expect an easy day or a morsel of kindness from me. You have no one to blame but yourself. With that, she turned and stomped into the hut, Amaka trailing behind. Amaka paused at the door to stick her tongue out at Omasiri and hiss, idiot, before ducking inside. Okori wrapped his arms around Omasiri protectively. I'm here, he whispered. He guided her toward the small lean-to kitchen hut so they could speak away from Nneka's earshot. There, by the glow of a single palm oil lamp, he checked her face. Her cheek was swollen and red, her lip cut from the slap. He fetched a cloth and dampened it and pressed it gently to her cheek. Through tears, Omasiri told her father everything that happened at the palace, what Obinna said, what she replied. Okori listened, at times shaking his head in disbelief, at times sighing. When she finished, he didn't scold her. He could see how traumatized and overwhelmed she was. He simply held her hand and said, My daughter, I wish you had accepted, not for any material gain, but because I see no other way out of this life for you. But what's done is done. We will pray that perhaps the prince reconsiders and asks again, or that the gods show another path. Omasiri closed her eyes. She doubted Obinna would ask again. She had seen the change in his face. she had likely offended him beyond repair. The weight of what she potentially lost, not just luxury, but freedom from Nneka, pressed on her. Had she made a terrible mistake? She wasn't sure. Her heart had told her it was right to refuse, but seeing what it resulted in made her second-guess everything. That night, Omasiri hardly slept at all. Every time she drifted off, nightmares of angry princes and vengeful stepmothers jolted her awake. By morning, she felt utterly drained. And true to her word, Nneka showed Omasiri no mercy henceforth. She walked her like a horse, gave her meager scraps to eat, and forbade Okori to interfere. If Okori tried to defend Omasiri, Nneka would shout him down viciously or threaten to leave and disgrace the family by telling everyone he raided a harlot who insulted the prince. It was irrational, but Nneka was beyond reason in her anger. Amaka followed suit, insulting Omasiri at every turn, calling her princess reject mockingly around the compound. So, Omasiri's life somehow became even worse than before. Her body grew thin from hunger, and her spirit felt almost broken. And in her quiet moments of despair, she cried out to the gods more fervently than ever, asking why fate was so cruel to her and whether she would ever know peace or happiness. Little did she realize that fate, though seemingly cruel, was not finished with Omasiri. The darkest and most desperate chapter of her life was about to unfold, pushing her to the very brink. But from that brink, destiny at last would lift her toward the light, fulfilling the promise that the innocent are never truly forgotten by the gods.